Hello, YouTube. I thought I'd make just a quick video sharing some of the things that have been on my mind recently in the year 2026. We're halfway through it. Time flies. My last video was several months ago, and I was talking about the Iran war and its relationship to to Gnosticism in the movie Dracula, the 2025 movie Dracula. And I think pretty much the majority of the things I said in that video have come to pass, including the post I made about how to lose a war, a tutorial, which was dated 4 months ago. Pretty much the natural implications of that post have flowed from it. And I want to sort of look to the future because this conflict is not going to be over anytime soon. It is kind of an unstoppable force meets an immovable object at this point, and I think the only way that it's going to be resolved is either a sudden awakening on the part of the American political class, which is not, it's probably just not going to happen. That's incredibly uncommon. And even if they do have a sudden awakening, that's not necessarily, it's not going to necessarily be that awakening is going to be for the better. But I want to look ahead rather to 2028. One of the interesting things about the American system is that it changes every 4 years or 8 years, depending on how popular the current candidate is. But this is the 8th year, or 7th year, 8th year, This is towards the end of Donald Trump's allotted time. And I think we learned a lot. It was a very revealing time, even if a lot of the promises and the things that people wanted to get out of his second term did not happen. That doesn't necessarily mean we didn't, what as that old saying goes, you don't always get what you want, but if you try, you get what you need. Well, I think we got a fair bit of what we needed to see. Looking at the landscape from 3 years ago, it's an entirely different landscape. If you think about 2023, 2024, this was kind of like, honestly, I think you can measure the trend of ideology in the Daily Wire stock prices. So 2023 was the efflorescence of the Daily Wire and PragerU. And Jordan Peterson was sort of in his prime. He was talking about global politics, getting out over his skis, But in order to get out over your skis, you kind of first have to ride the wave. And that wave was at the peak in 2023, November. And then, they defeated their great enemy, and a movement without an enemy is a fire without oxygen. And the new enemy, or the thing that people really wanted to focus on, was Israel. And so you see the rise of a sort of America First libertarianism. I mean, you see like Jewish libertarian ANCAP comedians talking with Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson. So that kind of tells you everything you need to know about where America's at right now. And the Daily Wire is going bankrupt. So again, to that curve. Took them 3 years to be the biggest up-and-coming media company in conservative politics, making movies, primed to override the mainstream, to going bankrupt, losing all their major talent, And so, looking forward, right? That was the past. What's the future? So, I think looking at the options for 28, they seem pretty slim at the moment. And I don't want this video to be seen as an endorsement or anything of JD Vance. I'm just looking at him as a person trying to carve out a central lane between two very divided camps of right-wing ideology, picking the middle lane and kind of getting flack from both sides. Now, just because somebody's getting flack does not mean that they're Doesn't mean they're over the target. It doesn't mean they're wrong either. It really is the devil's in the details. It really depends on the nature and the kind and the quality of the flack. But looking at J.D. Vance's recent appearances, not the ones trying to sell the Iran peace deal, the MOU, but more the ones where he's talking about political ideology and theology. I'm talking specifically about Joe Rogan and the Bishop Barron one that came out a day or two ago. Longtime follower of Bishop Barron since probably 22, maybe before, 21 maybe. Not because I'm Catholic. I'm obviously not. I'm not even Christian. But I acknowledge that that is a force in the world at the moment. And, you pay attention to the voices of powerful things, even if you think they're wrong and dangerous in a lot of ways. And so, because of my interest in right-wing culture and because of my interest in Bishop Barron, and I guess the phenomenon of Western history, which includes Catholicism as a central part, at least for the last 1,500 years or so, that video showed up to me about 5 hours after it dropped. And that prompted me to also read J.D. Vance's book. And in that book, he talks a lot about St. Augustine. Now, it's funny to see this happen because I've been saying for like 5 years that this time is a mirror for 400 AD, 400 Common Era, ad Domine, right? More than any other time. Because, at least in America, but also geopolitically, I think. Because, at least from my perspective, you're seeing a lot of the same themes play out. You're seeing antagonism between white Western monotheism and Islam, the Near Eastern monotheism, monarchies, sultans, that kind of thing. It's a one-for-one conflict with the Crusades. You're seeing people very interested in some negative and positive ways about rabbinical Judaism. This was exclusively a 500, 600, 400 AD problem, mostly 5 and 600 for that one. People are afraid of Kabbalah. People are afraid of heresies, Gnosticism. The amount of people I've heard talking about Gnosticism in the last 5 years, it's like, when was Gnosticism a big problem? 400 AD. All of these things are getting a second look. And I think there's very important reasons for that. But J.D. Vance, he specifically said, my confirming saint, which is kind of like guardian angel once removed, patron deity once removed. It's effectively the Catholic version of the planet that rules your chart in Hellenism, right? And he was like, well, it's St. Augustine. And I was thinking a lot about that the last few days. And I was like, okay, so why St. Augustine? Well, St. Augustine, in many ways, was a political, imperial, monotheistic pragmatist. So if you think about the time that he was living in, St. Augustine, unlike J.D. Vance, had probably very seldom met a Jew. He is operating out of a tradition that is largely foreign to him. And he converted probably because, if we're being completely honest, I mean, you can't really know somebody's motives, but it's a mixture of, it's political pragmatism with a very efflorescent verbal philosophical gloss on it. So St. Augustine is a person who is clearly educated. He's read Plato. He's read Aristotle, the lineage of Socrates, especially the early parts. He's well-versed in politics. He understands kind of the emergent nature of political order on a very deep, fundamental level. And a lot of his criticisms of why Rome is falling apart, he says it's because they're worshiping the wrong gods. Now, I've heard million people make this argument, not a million, but you know what I mean, in recent days. recent years, Jordan Peterson was saying that. He's like, oh, you have to be aware of lust and war and blah, blah, blah. And the issue with this is that there's two issues. The first issue is that it tends toward a sort of repression. And how would I put this? The second pragmatic issue, it's like a frame that the pragmatics are housed in, right? If something's working well, you don't need to pay close attention to its parts, right? So during the Pax Romana, during the time of Julius Caesar, during the time of Augustus, right? Like there's like this couple 100-year period there where Rome was like kind of at the peak, right? They were where the Daily Wire was in 2023. They were real happy, They're where Tucker Carlson is now, using these ridiculous metaphors. But they didn't really think that much about critiquing this sort of postmodern critique of the gods they were worshiping was not fashionable to do. I mean, there were people talking about like Plato talking about like, oh, isn't it a problem that Zeus is cheating all over his wife in the stories? It's like, I guess, but like also that doesn't change just because you pretend it's not happening. Like Bill Clinton still got a blowjob from Monica Lewinsky. This is not a common. You don't have to look hard to see Greek myths in modern life. They're everywhere. It's very, very obvious that they reflect reality more than any monotheistic text, which is why I'm a Hellenist. But the problem with Augustine is that he's hyper fixated on all these broken parts, right? He's like got a car that's completely broken down on the side of the road. That's the empire he lives in, right? The decaying remains of the Roman Empire, the rusty bolt bucket lemon that he's been sold. And he's like rummaging around in the car trying to get all the pieces to fit right? And he's calling that pragmatism. And it's like, but it's worse than pragmatism. Like he's looking back at all the abuse he's done to this car and people have done to it, and he's like basically making a catalog of how he fucked up his own car, in a sense, or the civilization, I guess, messed itself up. And I feel like that's kind of where J.D. Vance is at, right? So in a way, it's good that he's thinking about St. Augustine, even if I really don't like St. Augustine, and I think that he's like one of these necessary evils, that he's wrong in his very paradigmatic conceptual frame, and that's not his fault exactly, because he inherited that frame to some extent. He inherited the conditions that made him enter that paradigm, this decaying empire, this broken, rusty ass car. So it's not St. Augustine's fault that his ideology is kind of a time bomb. Now the people following St. Augustine, depending on how they follow it, they're going to be implicated in how they approach this 1600-year-old failed ideology that St. Augustine presented. As for his sort of, he's like describing why the plane that is the Roman Empire went down in the plane as a mechanic, to some extent, as an amateur mechanic, I guess. And that's kind of the position J.D. Vance is in. He's in this position of having to be a pragmatist, not because he's genuinely interested in the components of mechanics, but because his car just broke down on the side of the highway and he knows he fucked up back there. And he's got to figure out how he fucked up. And so, this is not an endorsement of J.D. Vance. It's just an acknowledgement of the parallels between our time and the time of St. Augustine. And, like everything else, you have to be aware of the meta problem before you can fix the meta problem. And I hear a lot I don't think St. Augustine was aware of the real meta problem. The real meta problem was probably beyond his scope. As I said, it's not his fault exactly. But J.D. Vance has the internet. He's got at least a potential for self-awareness that and education that St. Augustine was never afforded. And so he's going to have to reach into that abyss, because let's be real. If J.D. Vance only, let's say he becomes president, I don't think that would be a good thing, but it might be inevitable. It's too early to tell. We'll see what alternatives present themselves. But this is a universal criticism. If you're going to fashion yourself in the likeness of St. Augustine, you have to go beyond where St. Augustine went. It's not enough to be like, oh, we're a pragmatist, we're doing the wrong thing, we messed up back there, our car's broken down on the side of the road. No, you're going to have to actually pretend that 1,600 years of history since then actually happened. Because, I mean, let's be real, they happened. So, and I don't want to repeat the mistakes of St. Augustine and have my attempt to fix this car have the car split in half 50 years down the road. So, but I guess that's a collective effort that's going to have to be done by all of us. So, this is my 2 cents. Till next time.